Chapter 351, An Intense Fight, 2. A powerful ripple of energy swept past as an axe clashed against a wooden staff. A shocking scene ensued after the two weapons collided. Instead of the staff breaking apart upon making contact with the axe bounced off the body of the staff and a small opening appeared. "You think your mediocre weapon can go against my staff? An SS-ranked artifact?" Durara mocked. She obviously did not miss the opening. Pushing her palm forward, her hand touched Ultrich's bare body. Bang! A powerful blast sounded and Ultrich was pushed backward, only halting when his back crashed against the wall behind him. Durara had come on top at their first true exchange. Shio! 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 Not so far from them, the situation with Waylon looked a lot more controlled. He skillfully blocked the attacks coming from the Durgars standing behind Durara. Pushing his plan forward, a thick energy blast shot at terrifying speed towards the Durgar in the distance. But they were well prepared. Upon seeing Waylon's powerful attack, the Durgars chose not to panic. Throwing several small boxes on the floor, 5 large transparent barriers formed right in front of them. Bang! Right as the barriers formed, Waylon's attack reached the Durgar's position. Crack! 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 The moment his attack touched the barriers, 3 of them instantly tore apart as transparent shards of mana diffused in the air. But that was as far as the attack could go. By the time the first barrier broke, Waylon's attack lost half of its power, and with each progressive barrier that broke, the weaker his attack became. It wasn't long before his attack completely disappeared, leaving behind 2 intact barriers. Damn it! Staring at the scene in front of him, Waylon silently cursed. Although he didn't show it outwardly, I could tell that he was running low on mana. He still hadn't recovered from his previous battle. Even though it was faint, if one paid close attention, they would notice that the hue surrounding his body had dimmed a little. Things are not looking good. Although it was premature of me to say that they were both at a disadvantage, from how things were going, even if Waylon and Ultrich did end up winning, the two would be at their last breaths by that time and essentially become even more useless than the current me. Taking my eyes away from Waylon's fight and turning my attention back towards Ultrich, who seemed to still be in top shape, I spoke inside of my mind, addressing a certain someone. "Do you think your bloodline suppression can affect Durara?" "What do you mean?" Angelica responded inside of my mind. "If I were to somehow manage to get you close to Durara, do you think your bloodline can suppress her powers, even if it's a little bit? If I could, somehow, get Angelica close to Durara in her tooth form and then have her appear from behind and suppress the latter with her bloodline, we could gain the edge we need to win." After contemplating for a bit on how I could help, and running multiple different scenarios inside of my head, it was the best solution that came into my mind. Although it would be unrealistic to say that Angelica could suppress Durara by a lot due to the massive gap in strength, it might be enough to give Ultrich an advantage, or so I hoped. "That's impossible." Pouring cold water onto my ideas, Angelica denied the possibility. "I can tell what you're thinking. It's an unrealistic plan." "Why is that?" "The gap between my strength and hers is far too big for my bloodline to have any effect on her. Her contractor is probably a demon that far surpasses me in power as well. Even if it were possible, how can you guarantee that I'll get close to her without getting detected? She's an SS rank, not some nobody. She'll easily be able to notice something isn't right like Douglas did last time." "You're right." Angelica's words made me realize just how naive my thoughts were. If things were that easy, for as long as she was with me, fighting every elder present would be nothing but a breeze. I guess my hastiness had blinded me for a moment. But, then, what should I do? Time didn't wait for anybody. Every second we wasted made our situation slightly more disadvantageous, for those here and the others outside. Have me go toward those little creatures. It was then that Angelica suggested something. Processing her words, my eyes soon lit up in understanding. You don't mean. Indeed. Although I can't do anything about her, I can do something about those little creatures fighting that human. The urgency of the situation left no room for arguments. I didn't say anything about the fact that she called the Durgars little creatures and mused over Angelica's words. Indeed, if I had Angelica help Waylon defeat the Durgars holding him back, it would turn the situation into a 2 versus 1. Although Waylon was weaker than Durara, she was currently busy fighting someone whose strength was on par with hers. If Waylon was put into the mix, victory would almost be guaranteed. But that depended on how things would pan out next. All right, let's go with that plan. Having come to a decision, without wasting any second, I put my hand in my mouth and extracted one of my teeth. Wait. My hand suddenly paused as I thought of something. Do you have any devil fruits with you, or did you consume them all already? I asked inside of my mind. Yes, I used my last one before. My heart sank at her words. Then, how are we supposed to do this? Without the aid of the devil fruit, Angelica wouldn't be able to recover her demonic energy and suppress the Durgars. My head suddenly started to ache. Seriously. How are we supposed to do this when you don't have a devil fruit? What are you talking about? If we don't have a devil fruit, you won't be able to recover your demonic energy and suppress those little creatures. Unknowingly, as I was speaking, I started referring to the Durgars as little creatures. We don't need a devil fruit for that. Angelica replied in the most relaxed tone I'd heard. My eyes jumped slightly. We don't? You're contracted to me. You have demonic energy. Just put some into me and throw me in their direction. That actually makes sense. Why did I only just realize this now? Pausing in thought, my brows furrowed. Hold on, why didn't you do this before when we were in the other room? Last time, I was planning on fighting. This time, I'm not. I'm just trying to suppress them. All right, got it. Having thought things through, holding onto Angelica in my hand, I tried to channel my mana mixed with demonic energy into her. Be careful. Even though you may not have felt anything, the more mana you use, the further the demonic energy inside of you will corrode your mind. As I was injecting her with demonic energy, Angelica reminded in a serious tone. Fully aware of the fact, I nodded at her words. I know, don't worry. I had been contracted for a total of a week and a half with Angelica, and although I tried my best to use the least amount of mana possible, given the circumstances, I had no choice but to use it quite often. So far, nothing had happened, but I couldn't guarantee that things would remain the same in the future. I had to be more careful. Enough. After injecting a large chunk of my mana into Angelica, I stopped after hearing her voice. I can only keep this for 1 more minute before I return to my regular form. Quickly get me over there. Got it. Nodding my head, I turned to face Waylon, who was standing not so far from me, attacking the Durgars in the distance. The conversation I had with Angelica only spanned for at most half a minute. So, nothing much changed since the last time I saw him. This was good. Hey, Waylon. Raising my voice, I called out. Now is not the time, Ren. Bang. Smacking away an energy blast, Waylon raised his broadsword and swung it downwards. Watching him fight, I once again opened my mouth and shouted, Waylon, listen to me. Do one big attack. What are you talking about? With furrowed brows, Waylon turned to glance in my direction for a short second. Now is not the time to be messing around. Can't you see that I'm Boom. Cutting him mid-sentence, a small grenade-like object exploded right in front of him. A black gas cloud diffused in the air right after the explosion. Reacting just in time, Waylon closed his mouth and waved his hand, pushing all of the gas away. Right after, Waylon turned to glare in my direction. In response, I merely shrugged my shoulders and responded quickly, "Just trust me and force them to pay attention to you. I have a way to help you out." If that wasn't enough to convince him, I raised my hand and showed him the tooth in my grasp. The moment Waylon saw the tooth, he instantly understood what I was trying to do. Without wasting any time with unnecessary words, taking a step forward, the mana inside of Waylon's body shot out crazily, like a tidal wave. Clusters of mana threads surged out of his body. After which they all shot towards the broadsword in his hand, the length of the blade increasing drastically. From 2 meters to 3 meters and then 4 meters. It kept increasing until it finally reached 15 meters in length. Wielding an absolutely massive broadsword, if it could even be called that, Waylon stared at the enemy for a moment. The sheer aura of the blade instilled horror in the Duergars. Even Durara was almost distracted for a moment, but Ultrich didn't let her. Their clash continued fiercely, both sides not letting up. Before the Duergars could make a move, Waylon briefly glanced in my direction, signaling me to start. Silently nodding my head, I didn't waste a single second. The moment Waylon was about to cut downwards, I threw Angelica towards the Duergars' direction. Because my throw was extremely weak and their attention was currently focused on Waylon's sword, none of the Duergars present took notice of my action. How big of a mistake that was! A couple of seconds after I threw Angelica, Waylon let out a shout that came from deep within his body and slashed horizontally.
Huh?
Why Ying? Staring at the incoming attack with grim determination, the Duergars took out all their defensive artifacts and tried to use them. But just as they were about to do that, an oppressive force suddenly entrapped their body. The force that was entrapping their body wasn't too strong, for it only made their movements slightly sluggish. But, in a scenario where each second mattered, that slight disruption proved to be fatal.
Ha!
Heek! The desperate screams of the Duergars rang out as blood splattered everywhere. Falling simultaneously, the headless bodies of 7 Duergars fell to the ground with a small thud. Standing almost 15 meters away from them was Angelica, who had the palm of her hand open, directed towards where the Duergars were standing before. Thin threads of demonic energy lingered around her body. There were a total of 11 Duergars before, and of the 11, 7 were dead with the rest gravely injured. The rest was a breeze for Waylon. Pressing his foot on the ground, he disappeared from his spot and reappeared in front of the last remaining Duergars, killing them instantly. I wanted to join him on the fun, but before Waylon went to attack the Duergars, he put a small barrier around me, afraid that Durara would do something while he was busy killing the last remaining Duergars. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Spurt. Killing the last remaining Duergar, Waylon turned his attention towards Durara, who was fighting on equal footing with Ultrich. Because of how intense their fight was, neither knew what had just happened. They did not know that in the last few seconds, the balance of the whole battle had turned towards our favor. Chapter 352, An Intense Fight, 3. What are you doing, Angelica? Take their stuff. While Waylon was preparing to join the fight, glancing at Angelica, I pointed at the dead Duergars on the floor. Didn't you say that you were out of devil fruits? Check their stuff, there might be a couple in there. You just want their stuff, don't you? Angelica coldly said, having read my exact thoughts. Blinking a couple of times, I chose to remain silent. Raising her brows in the distance, Angelica gave me a not-so-amused look. Sighing, I came clean. Fine, you win. I do, so hurry up and get their stuff and give it to me. Keep the useless stuff. Having seen just how much trouble Waylon went through when he fought them, I couldn't help but covet the stuff that they had. There was definitely going to be something useful in there. Fine. Tempted by the idea of getting more devil fruits, Angelica eventually nodded her head and headed towards the corpses of the deceased Durgars. Rummaging through their stuff, she briefed me on the things that she found. I found another artifact, but just like the others, it requires a mixture of both mana and demonic energy to properly function. You can use it now, but when the contract is over you'll no longer be able to use them. Pausing, she glanced in my direction and continued. That is unless you're planning on consuming a devil fruit. If so, you can probably use them even after the contract is over. No, I'm good. I can just sell it in the black market for a good price. I quickly shook my head and denied her offer. Since the black market was for both villains and heroes, I didn't doubt that there was a market for the things that Angelica picked up. When I returned to the human domain, I planned on selling all of the stuff I got today to fund my future endeavors. Anything else? Bang, bang. Cutting me off was a large explosive sound that came from the distance. Turning my head to face the direction of where the sound came from, I was once again reminded of the fight that was happening next to me. However, contrary to the last time I looked at them, this time it was Ultrich who held the upper hand in the conflict. Angelica, get the stuff and quickly come back to me. Worried that something unexpected might happen, I urged Angelica to hurry up and return to me. Replying with a cold stare, Angelica silently picked up her speed before quietly returning to my side. For obvious reason, I had her transform into a tooth again. This time I didn't put her in my mouth and just put her in my pocket. Wararg! Just as I put Angelica in my pocket, letting out a deep roar that came from deep within him, Ultrich wildly rushed in Durara's direction. His movements contained no set pattern and looked sloppy, but the power contained within each swing was not something to take light of. They contained unimaginable amounts of power. Durara, who was standing behind a thin purple translucent barrier, knew this best as she struggled to find a chance to counterattack. Ultrich's attacks were just too relentless, forcing her to be in a passive position. It had gotten to the point that it looked like Ultrich was the one that was set to win the fight. You damned primitive race and your infinite stamina. She cursed out loud. Tapping her staff onto the ground, a giant ripple formed on the ground beneath her, and a strong circular pressurized wind gale shot outwardly, pushing everything away. The ripple wasn't anything powerful, however, it did successfully manage to accomplish its goal, which was to distance Ultrich, who was swept off of his feet and sent a couple of meters away from her. Fucking die! Taking advantage of the small gap that she had created, lightning crackled from the tip of her staff. In a matter of seconds, multiple bolts of lightning crackled around her staff, encircling it like a python strangling its prey. Slowly, the lightning condensed together, forming a rotating lightning plate. A wild and violent energy gathered within it, and an aura of destruction spread throughout the hall. A rare trace of solemnness surged onto Ultrich's face when faced with Durara's attack. It was too late for him to get close to her. He had to quickly counterattack her move with a move of similar power. Soon, a dark green hue began to surge into the surface of his body. Standing opposite each other, the two icily stared at each other as they prepared to unleash a terrifying attack. All of this happened in a matter of seconds, and before long, Durara opened her mouth. Do your best at surviving this. Raising her staff, she pointed the tip of her staff in Ultrich's direction. The electric plate that stood atop the staff suddenly whistled down. The space itself distorted an inch at a time as it traveled. Standing far and staring at the attack, my mind blank. If not for the protective shield that Waylon had set up around me, I would have been a goner just from the residual energy that it was releasing. In fact, the more I stared at the energy, the more I realized just how much danger I was in. If that attack did not diffuse and connected, I wasn't sure whether Waylon's barrier would be able to withstand the aftershocks of the impact. It was that terrifying. Crap. I wasn't the only one that shared the same thought as Waylon's face hardened considerably. Right before Durara attacked, throwing away 3 empty potion bottles, he took a deep breath. Hoo. Breathing out, a turbid, almost tangible breath released from his mouth before diffusing in the air. Locking his eyes in the direction of Durara, his broadsword, that was glowing brightly, suddenly brightened even more. Although no one could tell just how much mana Durara consumed when preparing her last attack, without a doubt she had used a considerable amount. For the last minute, knowing that the two of them had still noticed that he had won, Waylon had been secretly preparing for that exact moment to strike. And what better moment than now when Durara had just consumed a lot of mana to attack? Using every last ounce of mana in his body, the muscles of Waylon's body rapidly expanded. Staring at him from the distance, although I couldn't tell what type of attack he was trying to pull off, I could tell that it was no joke. Just from how the space around the broadsword distorted, it was evident that this was Waylon's last resort attack. The moment Durara released her attack, Waylon also attacked. Taking a step forward, he slashed downwards. Whying? To my surprise, the slash looked like any regular slash. There was nothing special about it. No fancy lighting, no space-distorting energy blast, or any of those flashy moves that made the attack look spectacular. It was just a plain downward swing. However, what happened next completely shocked me. The second that Waylon slashed down, the space around Durara suddenly distorted. Huh? Completely taken off guard by the changes happening around her, the moment the space distorted, it appeared next to her, Waylon's attack. The moment she noticed what was happening, Durara's face paled significantly. Before she could even react, the attack hit her in the body, and a metallic clink sounded. Clink. Hyak. Letting out a screech, Durara's body swung back a little and her attack changed direction. Instead of heading for Ultrich that was standing opposite to her, it headed towards the deeper end of the hall. As her attack was deflected, the metallic sound resonated in the air for a brief moment before disappearing. With her eyes wide open, Durara glared at Waylon. Revealed underneath her clothes was a shining armor that covered her whole body. You bastard! She screamed as she touched her armor that now had a large scar on it. Harg! But before she could do anything, taking advantage of the fact that her attack had missed and her attention was away, Ultrich, who had similarly charged up a powerful attack, swung his axe in her direction. A large cluster of light surfaced from the tip of his axe. After which, it arrived with a swift speed in her direction. The wild and chaotic energy within the attack caused the air to be torn apart. Swoosh! Staring at the incoming attack, Durara was left with no choice but to defend. Tapping the ground with her staff, multiple barriers formed around her. Ultrich, quick! While Durara was preparing herself to defend against his attack, Waylon, who was standing not so far from me, weakly called out as he pointed at the other side of the hall where Durara's previous attack headed. Turning his attention towards Waylon, Ultrich nodded his head in understanding. Crack! Stomping his foot on the ground, and not looking back, he reappeared before me and grabbed me by the waist.
Oof!
The moment his large muscular arms grabbed my waist, he knocked the air out of my body as I struggled to catch my breath. Crack! Once he grabbed me, Ultrich stomped his foot on the ground again and shot in Waylon's direction, and a similar scene occurred. Once he grabbed Waylon, using all of the last remaining energy inside of his body, he quickly ran towards the other side of the hall. Fortunately, his body contained an unbelievable amount of explosive power. With each step he took, he would cover over a large distance. It was almost as though he was continually teleporting. But even though we were moving at incredible speeds, Ultrich would look back from time to time in worry. That was because he knew that at the current speed we were going we might not be able to fully evade the aftermath of Durara's attack. Ultrich may have been able to defend against the attack had he been in optimal condition, but now that he had used a lot of his aura, added with the fact that Waylon and I were with him, the only choice he had was to run. Boom! It was then that a terrifying explosion sounded from behind and the whole building shook. The ceiling crumbled apart and a torrential flame shot towards our direction like an unstoppable tsunami. KHRRRR. Using every ounce of his strength, Ultrich ran as fast as he possibly could. Although he was carrying both me and Waylon, his speed never slowed down.
No.
Durara's desperate scream sounded from behind as the aftereffects of her own attack engulfed her entire body. Whether she lived or died, I could no longer tell as her shriek was soon drowned out by the powerful flame that was quickly approaching our direction. There. I pointed towards a door in the distance. Go to that room, that's where the dampening system is located. Okay. Nodding his head, Ultrich rushed towards the direction I pointed at. Within seconds we arrived at the entrance of the door, which at the moment was wide open as the Durgars inside of it went out to check what was responsible for the terrifying explosion. Bang! Kicking one of the Durgars to the side, Ultrich dropped both me and Waylon to the ground and shut the door behind us. Though it was close before the flame could get to us, Ultrich managed to push the doors down. As he shut the doors, I managed to catch a glimpse of the flames engulfing the hall that we were previously in. A cold chill ran down my spine as I witnessed the sight. Clank! Soon the door fully closed, and finally, everyone slumped on the ground to catch their breaths. As I was the one that had used the least amount of energy, it didn't take long for me to recover. Standing up, I looked around the room we were in. We've made it. We finally arrived at the control station of the dampening system enshrouding the whole of Inferno. Chapter 353, Shutting Down the System 1. Let me have a look. Moving towards the control system that overlooked the dampening system, I placed my palm on the holographic screen. Right as my hand touched the hologram, a map of the entire building presented itself before me. Marked on it were a multitude of red dots that depicted the areas where the dampening devices were installed. The range they covered was also displayed on it. Scanning the holographic map before me, my brows knit tightly. Placing my hand under my chin, I softly muttered, "This is a lot more troublesome than I had expected." Tapping one of the red dots marked on the map, a small window popped up in front of me. On the window were a series of complicated numbers and words. As I looked through the long, complex numbers and words displayed on the window, the chip inside of my head started processing the information in my mind. But it was useless. Even with the chip inside of my head, I could barely understand what was happening. The more I looked, the greater the frown on my face became. I should have expected this from the beginning. There's no way the dampening system wouldn't have some sort of defense mechanism installed. Getting into the place was the first hurdle, and the second hurdle was now deactivating the system, which, honestly, I knew very little about. Massaging my forehead, I tried my best to make heads or tails of the data before me. Turning my head, my eyes paused on Ultrich. He was lying on the ground, breathing heavily. No, that won't do. I thought about asking him if he knew anything, but after remembering that orcs weren't the brightest of creatures, I promptly gave up. Here. But just as my head was about to ache even more, Waylon arrived next to me and passed me a small, black-colored rectangular object. "What's this?" I asked in wonder as I took the device from Waylon's hands. Feeling it in my hands, the black object was sized and shaped to resemble a USB device. It wasn't exactly a USB though, since it looked like a black metallic stick. Flipping it around and seeing nothing particularly special about the stick, I lifted my head and looked up at Waylon. "What exactly is this supposed to do?" I repeated, sounding mildly curious. With a weak smile, Waylon explained, "Before coming, Jomnuk gave me this. He seemed to have already known that you would have trouble figuring out how to disable the system. He did? Well. Turning to look at the window filled with numbers, I couldn't deny Wayland's words. Or Jomnuk's, for that matter. Although Jomnuk did say that you could have done it by yourself, he also added that by the time you'd be done, hours would have already passed. And so, before coming here, he told me to pass it to you. Good idea. For a moment, I thought that I was going to be spending the next couple of hours trying to figure out how to enter the system. Fortunately, Jomnuk had great foresight. He had given Wayland the necessary equipment to help me disable the system. Given that time was of the essence, it was nothing short of a life-saving grace. Pointing at the holographic map in front of me, Wayland explained to me the uses of the stick. According to him, all you have to do is put this thing over there and it should automatically disable the system within the next couple of minutes. Listening to his words, I nodded my head repeatedly before opening my mouth and saying, "That's simple enough." It is. Just stick it in and let it do the rest. Got it, I'll do it now. Without wasting any time, I inserted the USB stick-looking device inside of a small socket at the bottom of the holographic system. Clink. The moment I inserted the device into the socket, the panel flashed and a small tab opened up. == Database synchronization. 0% _________________ 100%. Upon seeing the message window, my eyes lit up in glee. It worked. Looks like Jomnuk was right. Wayland smiled in relief from the side. We would have been in trouble if that didn't work. You're right. But, we're not in the clear yet, I responded from the side, cooling down my initial excitement. Taking a look at the panel tab that had now moved up to 2% progress, I solemnly said, I'm sure that the elders have been made aware of what happened here by this time. If my estimates aren't wrong, they'll send a couple of them to us soon. Looking at Wayland, whose complexion was extremely pale, and Ultrich, who, well, still looked green but had a tired look on his face, I could tell that in the state they were currently in, another fight would only lead to our imminent loss. Oh, right. It was then that a thought suddenly occurred to me as I looked at Ultrich's direction. Tapping on my bracelet, I took out a small bag and walked up to him. Tapping him on his broad shoulder to get his attention, I pushed the bag in his direction. These might help you recover a bit. Huh? Turning to face me, Ultrich briefly glanced at my face before looking at the bag in my hands. What are these? His deep voice echoed throughout the room. Just a few things I picked up in a certain place. The place was none other than Amora, but he didn't need to know that. After taking everything that I could possibly get from that place, there were a few things I had no use for. Especially the fruits that were inside of the bag, they were useless to me. I wasn't exactly sure on how precious they were because I could not ingest them, but they would hopefully be of some use to Ultrich, whose aura was low right now. Since potions didn't really exist for orcs, as they used aura, the orcs couldn't recover like we did with mana. They consumed special fruits like the ones in my hands. In retrospect, they did recuperate their aura at a much faster rate than us, but it still took a bit of time. By giving Ultrich the fruits, I was hoping that he would have a much easier time recovering his strength for when more enemies arrived. Show what is inside, human. Though initially skeptical, Ultrich took the bag in my hand and looked through it. The moment he opened the bag and saw what was inside of it, his eyes opened wide in shock. Seeing Ultrich's rapidly changing facial expressions was so amusing I couldn't hold back a smile. Pointing at the bag, his eyes darted between me and the bag. This? How? No, where did you get this? He said with slight excitement in his voice. Standing up from the ground, Ulrich hurriedly moved towards where I was and grabbed me by my shoulders before he started shaking me a little violently. Where did you get this stuff? Answer me, human. Unable to free myself from Ulrich's grasp, I was left powerless as he shook my body around like a doll. Hold on. Wait a minute. Stop. For a brief moment, I felt my life flash before my eyes as Ulrich shook my body repeatedly. To make matters worse, no matter how much I tried to free myself from the grasp of his hands, they wouldn't budge an inch. It was as though Ulrich's hands were stuck on me like glue. I'm starting to understand Durara's pain. Ulrich, stop. You're killing him. It was only after Waylon spoke to him that Ulrich realized what he was doing to me. Letting go of me, he scratched the back of his head and apologized. Oh, sorry. I was a bit too excited. I was a little surprised by the sincerity in the huge orc's tone. It felt a little odd. Putting his hand inside of the bag, Ulrich took out a pale fruit. Somehow, the fruit looked really beautiful. Looking at me and Waylon, Ulrich admired the fruit in his hand. As he looked at it, hints of nostalgia could be seen in his eyes. You may not know this, but this fruit over here is a rare delicacy I have not seen in over 5 decades. Back when we were still in our own world, I would eat this every day with my comrades and friends. It was a time where we basked in the sunshine and enjoyed the afterglow of the sunset. I'd almost forgotten those days until I saw this again. The nostalgia in the orc's tone became even more apparent the more he talked. I had never seen him talk so much, especially in such a tone. Over 5 decades? Waylon asked in surprise. Turning his attention towards the fruit, he tilted his head. Strange, I don't feel any mana fluctuations coming from it. That's because this fruit is not something you can consume. Splitting the fruit in two, a subtle energy sprang forth from inside it. It was a familiar energy that Waylon knew all too well. Aura. Correct? Nodding his head, Ulrich took a bite of the fruit. With the fruit's juices dripping from his large hands, Ulrich showed a delightful expression. It tastes just as I've remembered it. So? Did it help you recover a bit? I asked. Recover? Yes. I mean, did the fruit help you recuperate some of the aura you lost? With his other hand holding on to the fruit, Ulrich closed his eyes. After that, for a brief moment of time, he did not speak. It was only after a minute had passed that he opened his eyes. Raising his hand and devouring the other side of the fruit, Ulrich opened his mouth. The grade of this fruit is good. But it is still too little for me to make a full recovery. Is that so? I said with a little bit of disappointment. Pointing at the other fruits in the bag, I asked again, what about if you eat all of those fruits? The moment I finished saying those words, Ulrich's face hardened. Finish?
Yeah.
You said that it helped you recover a bit. What if you ate them all? Staring at the fruits in his hands, Ulrich's face contorted. After a while, he grimly responded. I should be able to recover half of my aura. That's good. My eyes instantly lit up at his words. If he recovered half of his aura, it would make things a lot easier for us going forward. Turning my attention towards the panel and seeing that it was still only at 5%, I knew that we would soon be going through another tough battle. The goal was to disable the whole dampening system. Once that happened, communications would return and the tides of the battle should start shifting towards our direction. As my thoughts paused there, turning my head to face Waylon, I asked, how about you? How long will it take for you to recover your strength? Me? Placing his hand on his chin, Waylon closed his eyes for a brief moment before shaking his head. At least 1 more hour. I won't be able to help much in the next hour. 1 hour? Frowning, I looked towards my right arm. Shaking my head, I said, I'm the same. Not that it really matters, since you guys are way stronger than me. Well, I could just take care of the mobs. That would make things easier for them. Although they wouldn't be able to do much harm to Waylon and Ultrich, they could still prove to be annoying. And, in a tough battle, such distractions could even prove fatal. It was best if I could recover quickly as well. Okay, eat the fruits now and recover quickly. We never know when they are going to come at us. By now, the enemy should already be aware that something happened to Durara, so we should probably get ready. Boom! But just as my words faded, a large explosion sounded and the whole room shook. Opening my eyes wide, I stared at Ultrich and Waylon. Their gazes interlocked with mine. Then, turning towards the panel and seeing that it had only moved to 7%, my face sank. They came a lot faster than expected. Chapter 354, Shutting Down the System, 2. Boom! The metallic door that led to the room shook as a thunderous explosion rang out. They're already here. Focusing my attention on the door, my face turned solemn. After that, turning my attention towards the window that displayed the percentage of progress, I mused to myself. The rate of progress at the moment is about 1% for every 5 seconds. The current progress is 7%, and therefore, we would need to stall them for about 465 seconds. That's a little bit under 8 minutes. With the aid of the chip inside my head, I was able to calculate the time we needed to stall the Durgars in seconds. Although it did not sound like a lot of time, given our current circumstances and the opponents we were up against, it was too long. The stakes were up against us. In fact, I wasn't sure whether we would be able to defend for such a long period of time, especially since we needed to take into account our current surroundings. If the stick inside of the panel broke, we'd be screwed. Boom! Disrupting me out of my thoughts was the sound of another explosion. It came from the other side of the door. As the explosion rang, a narrow gap appeared by the edge of the door, exposing what was happening outside. Although it was only a small glimpse, I could tell that there were several Durgars waiting for us outside. I didn't even need to check whether an elder was present, because I could feel a threatening aura from outside of the door. It was almost on the same level as Durara. Almost. I could feel that the elder was a bit weaker than her. It seemed like I wasn't the only one who noticed that, as Ultrich's face eased up a little. But only just a little. The odds were still stacked against us. The door won't last for long, you need to eat those fruits now. The more time you waste, the less time you'll have for recovery. I said while pointing at the bag in Ultrich's hands. I can understand that you don't want to eat them, but we can't afford to have you conserve the fruits. I smiled and added, if you want more, I'll get you some later. You will? Ultrich's head snapped in my direction. It was so fast I thought his head could have popped off. Seeing how he reacted to my words, I knew that I had the crux of the problem in my grasp. Well, yes. I think I should be able to get more later. I won't make any promises, but I'll keep it in mind. I had to go back to Amora one day or another, so getting him more of those fruits wouldn't really be hard for me. Well, that was as long as Silig did as planned. If not, there'd be no point in me going to Amora where a marquis-ranked demon was eagerly waiting to roast me alive. I wonder how Silig is doing. I hope he's secretly getting strong, as planned. Ultrich's voice disrupted me out of my thoughts. That is good enough for me. After getting some form of confirmation from me, no longer hesitant, Ultrich rummaged through the bag and stuffed his mouth full with the fruits from Amora. Scrunch! Scrunch! Juices flowed down from the edges of his mouth as he devoured the fruits as though he was drinking water. Boom! The door shook once more. Damn it, why couldn't they have made the doors more durable? I shouted out loud as I stared at the door, which was slowly breaking apart. For a door that was supposed to lead to the dampening control system, it was a little too loose. Well, in the first place, they didn't expect anyone to be able to infiltrate their own base. Although the dwarves have indeed planted some spies, they wouldn't expect them to pull off a stunt of this caliber. Waylon murmured from the side, responding to my previous words. I guess you're right. If not for the fact that the elder behind the door had still not made a move, the door would have already crumbled. The only reason why he didn't was probably out of caution, fear that we might end up ambushing him out of nowhere. Boom! Boom! The door shook even more fiercely as multicolored lights flashed from the narrow gap in between the door. Putting my hand in my pocket, I threw Angelica towards the corner of the room. Get ready. I, of course, did not forget to throw her a few devil fruits. They were ones she had managed to loot from the Duergars earlier. Unfortunately, they weren't very high-quality fruits, so I didn't know how useful they'd be. Try to recuperate as much demonic energy as possible. It looks like we're in for a tough battle. Because they were busy staring at the door, both Waylon and Ultrich did not notice what I did. Even then, it wouldn't have mattered. Once I made sure Angelica was okay, turning my head towards Waylon, I asked in a serious tone, how long do you think the doors will be able to last? Not sure. Maybe a minute. And that's me being optimistic. If an elder is personally making a move, I'd give it half a minute. That's too little time. We needed to stall for at least the next 7 minutes. 1 minute was not going to cut it. Let's not wait before acting. The more time we waste the better. Okay. Nodding in agreement, I took my attention away from Waylon and checked my dimensional space. Let's see. Because I didn't have enough time, I had still not checked what I'd gotten from killing those Duergars. Perhaps, there might just be something that could prove to be useful to me. It was then that I finally spotted something. I've got something. My eyes lit up in glee as I took out a couple of things from my dimensional space. Tapping Waylon on the shoulder, I showed him 3 familiar metal boxes. I think I've got something that might be able to help us stall for time. What is it? Remember this? I said as I channeled my mana to the metal boxes. The moment my mana entered the black boxes, they lit up with a strange light and expanded. Before long, a large barrier formed before us. Where did you even get that from in the first place? Waylon asked with a look of surprise on his face. Looting, obviously, I responded with an obvious look whilst walking towards the door, and placing the metal boxes by the side, close to the hinges. One in front, another on the left, and the last one on the right side. After that, I channeled my mana into them and 3 barriers formed. As I was setting them up, turning to look behind me, I asked, these things were able to block your attacks, right? It should be able to stall for a bit of time. You're right. Pausing, Waylon furrowed his brows. But I don't know just how useful it will be against SS ranks. The gap between each stage is massive. That's fine, we just have him to hold him back for a little bit. I pointed at Ultrich, who was eating the fruits and slowly recovering his aura. As soon as the door breaks, Ultrich will stall the strongest Duergar while we defend against the weaker ones. It's a bit risky. Waylon muttered reluctantly. With a serious, contemplative look, he glanced at the shaking door. What are we going to do once we shut down the system? That. There's no need to worry about that. I've already got a solution. Is that so? Yup, so all we have to do now is Boom. Not even allowing me to finish my sentence, the door broke apart, revealing the Duergars standing behind. Holding on to several different artifacts oozing with power, they didn't even wait for the door to fully fall before starting to mercilessly shoot in our direction. Shio! 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 The energy blasts from their weapons shot in our direction at terrifying speeds. They were so fast that I was unable to react in time. If not for Waylon, who was next to me, reacting in time and activating the barriers, I would have seriously been injured. Warg! What followed the first attack was Ultrich's shout as his voice reverberated throughout the whole room. Without wasting any time, his figure shot towards the Duergar who had the most powerful aura. Holding onto a massive hammer that was way bigger than he himself, the Duergar raised it and met Ultrich's attack head-on. Bang! A circular, pressurized wind spread out from their collision, sending everyone nearby flying away. Only a few were able to remain standing, and of those, I wasn't one. My body crashed against the back of the room, knocking the air out of my lungs. KHHH. You okay? Waylon asked as he looked back at me. I'm fine. Sliding down, I raised my head and reassured Waylon that I was still somewhat intact. Fuck, that hurt. I cursed. Wiping the side of my mouth, I weakly stood up. Damn it. If not for the barrier I had set up beforehand, I would have most likely died there. Just a simple attack from the two of them almost cost me my life. That was how scary SS ranks truly were. People were collateral damage to them. Fortunately, they both held back a bit. Had they truly gone all out, not only I would have died, but the other Duergars present would have joined me in the afterlife too. Bang, bang. The loud banging sound from the fight never ceased as both Ultrich and the Duergan Elder continued to fight in the distance. With each attack, they would progressively get further away from us. It became evident to us that they each wanted to avoid letting their own side suffer from the aftermath of their attacks. During their exchange, neither held the upper hand, and although Ultrich was in fact one sub-rank higher than the Elder he was fighting, their fight at the moment was even because he had still not fully recovered his aura. He was fighting conservatively. Watch out! Waving his hand forward and creating a small barrier around me, Waylon deflected the wind gales that arose from the conflict between Ultrich and the Elder, as well as some of their residual energy. However, it came at a cost, as Waylon's face paled a tiny bit. Breathing out, he urgently said, Rin, quickly get up. We don't have much time. Standing opposite to us were the Duergars from before with their weapons ready. All of their weapons varied, ranging from guns to hammers and even swords or axes. A bright glow enveloped their weapons as they all glared in our direction. Staring at the Duergars opposite, Waylon's face became grim. I don't have much mana in me. I don't know for how long I'll be able to hold them back. Once again wiping the side of my mouth, I walked up to Waylon and reassured, don't worry too much. We've got help. The moment my words faded, and right as the Duergars were about to attack the barriers, their movements suddenly became sluggish as a bone-chilling pressure enveloped their bodies. What? Spotting this, Waylon's eyes jumped up. Sensing something, Waylon turned his head and looked behind him. With her hand raised, standing right behind me, Angelica held a couple of fruits in her left hand. Cracka! Cracka! Taking out a long metal stick, my reward for defeating the Duergar in the artifact testing facility, I grasped it tightly and let my mana flow in it. Then, with a confident tone, I spoke while looking at the enemy. She should be able to lend us a hand. Chapter 355, Shutting Down the System, 3. You handle the weaklings. Taking a bite of the fruit, black threads of demonic energy sprung forth from Angelica's body. Her clothes fluttered, accompanied by her glossy black hair that wildly flung around. With cold and apathetic eyes, she eyed the Duergars standing opposite to her before her delicate foot gently pressed onto the ground and her figure disappeared. Swoosh! Once Angelica made her move, turning to face Waylon, I pointed towards one particular Duergar whose aura was incomparably stronger than any of the other Duergar present. Can you stall that guy? With his eyes already locked onto the Durgar I was talking about, Waylon nodded his head. I should be able to. Although I can't defeat him, I think I should be able to stall him. Especially since that demon companion of yours should be able to somewhat weaken his strength. I'll leave it to you. Nodding my head, I took out a small circular device from my dimensional space and threw it on the floor. The moment the device touched the floor, four retractable claws extended from the bottom of the device, hooking themselves onto the ground. Fine miniature crevices appeared on the ground as the device hooked itself firmly on the ground. Walking up to it, I waved my hand over it. Vroom. Moments after I waved my hand over it, the mana in the surroundings started spiraling towards it, stopping right at the very top of the device. Slowly, with each second that passed, the mana spiral would become bigger and bigger. Before long, a miniature portal had started forming. Bending down quickly, I inserted the coordinates of the room I had previously used when I was disguised as Carl. All right, I'm done setting this up. Once I was done setting up the device on the ground, I looked at the timer and noticed that it had moved up all the way to 13%. Once the dampening system would deactivate, I shouldn't have a problem using the portal since there was no longer anything blocking the portal from connecting with the other portal I had set up before and where Waylon had come into the building from. Bang! An explosion suddenly sounded from behind me. With the metal rod in my hand, turning to face the direction of where the fight was happening, I clenched my right hand slightly. Still not good. Some of the feelings that I had lost had returned, but it was still not in the state where I could use it properly. My right hand was now more of a liability than an asset. Clenching onto the metal rod with my left hand, I put all my mana into it until the lightning started revolving around it. Cracka! Cracka! Once lightning started to formulate around the rod, channeling wind scions at the bottom of the soles of my shoes, my toes pressed onto the hard ground and my body shot towards the weaker Durgars in the distance. Cracka! Cracka! Hew up! In an instant, I appeared before the nearest Durgar and slashed downwards diagonally. As I slashed down, a diagonal blue line formed in the air, tracing my attack. Caught off guard, the Durgar was unable to react in time, and so the moment I slashed down, the rod instantly hit him in the shoulder. Bang! Although the force of the attack wasn't very strong as I was only using one hand, the moment the rod touched the Durgar's body, the electricity that come from the rod swiftly entered Durgar's body and stunned him. Clank! Taking advantage of the situation, I raised my foot and kicked him in the head. Swoosh! Drawing a beautiful arc in the air, my kick hit the Durgar right in the head, sending his head crashing into the hard ground. Bang! With a bang, his body planted face first onto the ground. Following that up, I raised the rod and stabbed it downwards. Fresh blood spurted everywhere and what remained of the Durgar was just the body. That's one of 4. There were a total of 8 Durgar present. Of the lot, there was 1 S ranked 1, 2 A ranked 1s, 1 B ranked 1, 4 C ranked 1s, and 1 D ranked 1. The Durgar I had just killed was one of the 4 C ranked ones. At the moment, Waylon was handling the S ranks Durgar, while Angelica was holding back the 2 A ranks and B ranks. With her bloodline advantage, she was able to keep them in check, but just barely. Catching a glimpse of her fight, I noticed that she was currently in a bit of a disadvantageous position as the 3 Durgars attacked her from all sides. They were relentless as they didn't even leave her any room to catch her breath. Fortunately, all she had to do was stall them, not beat them. Although she was at a disadvantage, she was still handling it well. Without a doubt, she should be able to hold on for the next 30 minutes, which was all I asked for. Swoosh! Sensing something, my head snapped toward my left where I saw the pointy tip of a cold blade heading for my eyes. Clink! Hooah! Reacting almost out of instinct, I stabbed the rod upwards, hitting the bottom of the blade. Once the top of the rod hit the blade, it redirected it upwards and the tip of the blade narrowly missed my eyes. Cold sweat trickled down my back as I realized just how close of a call that was. Focusing my attention towards the perpetrator, I found a Durgar standing not so far from where I was. Next to him were the other 4 Durgars. Staring at them, and glancing toward my right arm, I silently cursed. Well. Shh. *T. Shio. 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 Without giving me a chance to properly analyze the situation, one of the Durgars, the weakest one, raised his gun and shot in my direction. Almost at the same time he started shooting, the 3 other Durgars also began to act. Following behind the energy blasts that shot from the gun, they quickly headed towards my direction. Stomping my foot on the ground beneath me cracked apart and my body shot back. Despite doing so, my body was still slower than the incoming energy beams as they easily gained ground on me. Staring at the incoming energy beams, rather than panicking, I raised my left hand, the one that held onto the metal rod, and channeled all my mana into it. Within seconds, a translucent green hue enveloped the body of the rod. Once the hue completely enveloped the rod, my body soon came to an abrupt halt.
Ha!
Crying inside of my heart, I twisted the rod in my hand in a circular motion. Once I spun the rod in my hand, a sort of translucent circular shield appeared in front of me. Taking a step forward, I met the attacks head-on. Clink! 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 A strange scene followed suit. The moment the energy blasts met the body of the rod, instead of hitting it, they changed direction completely, shooting away from me. Before I knew it, all 3 beams shot away from me. As expected, all my training with Waylon wasn't for nothing. I inwardly muttered as I looked at the rod in my hand, which was currently coated by the same green glow as before. The trick I had just used was a trick that I had learned from fighting against the demons during the waves. By coating my weapon with wind scions, I could essentially create an effect in which the wind scions would act as a repellent for anything that touched them. It had to be noted that this sort of thing was not something I could have pulled off before. Although it looked easy, it was nothing but easy. What I just did required a high level of control over scions, and if not for Waylon and Douglas's teaching over the past month, I would have never been able to pull off such a move. Swoosh! Not even a second after I managed to redirect the attacks away, the 3 other Durgars were already upon me. But I was prepared. The moment they arrived before me, lowering my left hand, the green glow enveloping the rod disappeared. Turning my head, I stared at the Durgars right in the eyes and inwardly muttered. The one. The atmosphere instantly froze and the bodies of the 3 Durgars came to an abrupt halt. Following this, their faces paled, and their body trembled. With my eyes locked on a particular Durgar, putting the rod away, I raised my hand and enveloped his face with the palm of my hand. Crack! The sound of a skull breaking sounded and blood spurted all over my face. At the same time I squeezed my hand, twisting the heel of my right foot, I twisted my torso and my body spun. As my body spun, I raised my left leg and kicked with it, further adding to the momentum of the spin. Crack! Midway through the spin, I felt a slight force on the heel of my left foot. What followed after was the sound of something breaking sounded. Thud. Thud. Once I managed to stabilize my body, the bodies of the 2 Durgars I killed fell onto the ground with 2 small thuds. Without even looking at where the sound originated from, I focused my attention on the last 2 Durgars who were stunned by what they saw. I, of course, took advantage of this. Extending my left hand, the rod once again appeared in my hand. Lightly throwing it in the air, I once again twisted the heel of my right foot at an angle of 45 degrees. Simultaneously, I raised my left foot and kicked. Shio! My foot soon connected with the tip of the rod, and the rod disappeared from my vision. As I had not channeled mana into the rod, no lightning formed around it. But that didn't really matter. To only deal with a D rank, that was enough. Swoosh! Using the momentum of the kick, once my foot kicked the rod, it did not stop as it quickly headed towards the last Durgar that was close to me. Raising both hands, the Durgar tried to block my attack, but it was in vain. Once my foot connected with his arms, the sound of his arms breaking sounded and he fell backward onto the hard ground. Heek! Bang! Once the Durgar fell onto the ground, the rod appeared before the other Durgar and hit him directly in the head. Whether he had lived or died, I wasn't sure. Raising my foot, I stomped down and killed the last Durgar. Spurt! Blood once again sprayed everywhere.
Ha! Ha!
Once I killed the last Durgar, I noticed that my breathing was quite heavy. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, and wiping the sweat that had accumulated on my forehead, I moved towards the main room and checked the holographic map. Data synchronization. 0% underscore 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 94% underscore 100%.
Ha!
94%? That's go. Boom. But just as I was about to rejoice at the fact that the dampening system was about to deactivate, a terrifying explosion sounded near me. Turning my head, my face paled considerably and what replaced it was a look of horror. All forms of fighting stopped, and the atmosphere froze completely. Oh.
Shh!
*T. With a blank look on my face, my head stopped working as a feeling of death enveloped my entire being. You. A blue skinny hand pointed in my direction. Following this, a high-pitched voice sounded across the entire hall. You, because of you. Standing over Ultrich's body, with disheveled hair, and half of her entire face burned, was Durara. Raising her staff and stabbing it right into Ultrich's heart, blood spilled all over her entire body. I will kill you. Before I could even react, Durara aimed her staff in my direction. A bright white light shot in my direction, and time froze. Or should I say, I wished for it to stop. Coming at me like an unstoppable tsunami, the bright light came towards me, enveloping my entire body. There and there, although I couldn't tell for real, I felt my whole existence disappear like that. It all happened too fast. What followed after the white glow was total darkness.